Imagine sitting peacefully in your home when a giant wave suddenly crashes through your street. A wave not made of water. A wave made entirely of beer. This sounds impossible, but it really happened in London, and it became one of history's strangest disasters. Let's travel back more than 200 years. London was one of the busiest cities in the world. Factories and businesses were expanding rapidly, and beer was one of Britain's favorite drinks. The demand for beer was enormous. Breweries worked constantly to supply the city. One brewery was especially famous. It was called Meux and Company Brewery. Inside stood enormous wooden beer vats. These containers were gigantic. Some were as tall as multi-story buildings. Each vat stored huge quantities of porter beer. Thousands of metal hoops held the wooden walls together. The pressure inside was immense. Then something unusual happened. One of the metal bands had become loose. The worker immediately noticed the problem. He reported it to his supervisors, but similar issues had happened before. Nobody believed disaster was approaching. The giant vat remained standing. Hours passed without incident. Everything appeared completely normal. Then, without warning, the nightmare began. The cracks spread rapidly across the giant vat. The wooden walls could no longer hold the pressure. Then the entire structure exploded. Millions of liters of beer burst into the building. The force shook the entire brewery. The explosion triggered a chain reaction. Another giant container burst apart. Then another one failed. The brewery became a sea of destruction. Workers fought to escape. Some barely avoided the flood. The giant wave smashed through internal walls. Nothing could stop it. The flood headed toward the outer walls. Then the brewery walls collapsed. A beer tsunami entered the neighborhood. Residents heard a thunder-like roar. People rushed to their windows. What they saw was unbelievable. The flood struck the first row of houses. Walls shattered instantly. Windows exploded outward. Furniture floated through rooms. Families ran for safety. The streets became rivers of beer. People struggled to stay on their feet. Barrels and debris rushed through the current. Panic spread throughout the neighborhood. The flood continued, destroying everything in its path. London was experiencing a disaster, unlike anything it had ever seen. As the flood spread, many residents were caught completely by surprise. The powerful wave reached crowded homes near the brewery. Inside one house, people were gathered together when disaster struck. Moments later, the flood burst through the building. Several buildings suffered severe damage. Neighbors desperately called out for help. Some people became trapped beneath fallen debris. Others fought the strong current to survive. The flood transformed ordinary streets into dangerous waterways. Rescue efforts began immediately. Brave locals rushed into flooded areas. Every second mattered. The neighborhood was filled with confusion and fear. Many struggled to understand what had happened. News of the disaster spread rapidly. People across the city began hearing rumors. Some could hardly believe the story. A flood of beer sounded impossible. Yet the destruction was undeniable. Officials soon arrived to inspect the scene. Authorities wanted answers. The brewery became the center of attention. Experts examined the shattered vats. The scale of the destruction shocked everyone. Witnesses described hearing an enormous explosion. Many compared the sound to thunder. Investigators began collecting statements. Attention quickly focused on the giant storage vats. The loose metal hoop became an important clue. The mystery of the beer flood was beginning to unfold. As investigators continued their work, the cause became clearer. Evidence pointed toward structural failure. The enormous pressure inside the vat had been too much. One failure triggered a deadly chain reaction. The disaster was officially ruled an accident. No evidence of sabotage was ever discovered. The brewery faced enormous financial losses. Thousands of barrels worth of beer had been lost. The company now faced difficult questions. Public attention remained focused on the tragedy. Newspapers across Britain reported the shocking event. The story spread far beyond London. Many readers struggled to believe it. A flood of beer sounded like fiction, but the disaster was painfully real. In time, the brewery began rebuilding. Engineers studied what had gone wrong. Safety became a greater priority. Industrial standards slowly improved. Lessons were learned from the tragedy. More than 2 centuries have now passed, yet people still remember the London beer flood. It remains one of history's strangest accidents, a disaster caused by something as ordinary as beer. What began as a normal day ended in tragedy. One small warning sign had been overlooked, and the consequences were devastating. The London beer flood became a permanent part of history. A reminder that even the most unlikely dangers can become deadly. And that is the unbelievable true story of the London beer flood of 1814.